The air in Hollow Creek carried the scent of damp pine and secrets too heavy to bury. Nestled between jagged cliffs and a restless river, the small town shimmered under a perpetual gray sky, its clapboard houses leaning into each other, like old friends sharing gossip. For Clara Henshaw, though, Hollow Creek wasn't a refuge, was a cage. At 32, she'd spent her life here, tending the counter at the Creekside Diner, her hands stained with coffee, and her smile worn thin by routine. She was the kind of woman people trusted steady, warm, the one who remembered your order before you spoke it. But trust, Clara was learning, was a fragile thing. It started with the letter. Tucked into her mailbox 3 days ago, its edges yellowed and crisp. It bore no stamp, no return addressed, just her name scrawled in a hurried, familiar slant. She'd found it after a long shift, her boots crunching on the gravel path to her porch, the river's murmur a restless hum in the distance. Inside, the words hit her like a slap. I know what you did, Clara, 15 years ago. Meet me at the old mill tomorrow night, or everyone else will know too. No signature. Just a threat, sharp and cold. 15 years. The summer she turned 17, when the world still felt wide and hers to claim. She'd buried that memory deep down where the river couldn't reach, where the pines couldn't whisper it back. But someone hadn't forgotten. Someone had been watching, waiting. Her fingers trembled as she reread the note, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. She hadn't told a soul, not her brother, Theo, who lived across town fixing cars and drinking too much. Not her best friend, Marin, who'd laugh it off as a prank. This wasn't a prank. This was a reckoning. The next night, under a moon half hidden by clouds, Clara stood at the edge of the abandoned mill. Its skeletal frame loomed against the cliffside, windows shattered, the air thick with mildew and rust. Her breath puffed in the chill, her scarf tight around her neck as she clutched a flashlight. She told herself she wouldn't come, that whoever wrote the note could go to hell. But fear had a way of pulling strings, and here she was, heart hammering, waiting. Footsteps crunched behind her. She spun, beam slicing through the dark, and there he was, Elliot Voss, her high school boyfriend, the boy she'd loved with every reckless beat of her teenage heart. His hair was thinner now, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but those gray eyes still cut through her like they had back then. He looked older, harder, like life had chewed him up and spat him out. Clara, he said, voice low, almost tender. You came. What the hell is this, Elliot? She stepped back, the flashlight trembling in her grip. You disappeared for 15 years, and now you're blackmailing me? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not blackmail. A proposition. I need your help, Clara. And you owe me. Owe you? Her laugh was sharp, bitter. You left me. You left us. I don't owe you a damn thing. His gaze darkened, and he stepped closer, the scent of cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. You think I wanted to leave? You think I had a choice? After what happened? After what you did? Her stomach dropped. He knew. Of course he knew. That summer night by the river, the fight, the blood, the lie they'd sworn to keep. She thought it was behind her, sealed in the past like a grave. But graves, it seemed, could be dug up. Elliot, her voice cracked, but he cut her off. Save it. I'm not here to drag it all back. Not yet. I need money, Clara, a lot of it, and you're going to help me get it. Money? She blinked, thrown by the shift. I sling coffee for a living. I don't have. You will, he said, pulling an envelope from his coat. He tossed it at her feet, the thud muffled by the damp earth. Open it. She hesitated, then knelt, fingers brushing the cold ground as she tore it open. Inside was a bank statement not hers. The name at the top read Hollow Creek Trust, an account she'd never heard of, with a balance that made her breath catch. $2.3 million. Below it, a handwritten note. The town's little secret. Your ticket out. What is this? She whispered, looking up at him. Elliot crouched, his face inches from hers, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. It's leverage, Clara. The mayor, the council, they've been skimming for years. I found it when I came back. We can take it, split it, start over. but I can't do it alone. Her mind raced. Theft. Betrayal. A way out. She'd spent her life playing it safe, keeping her head down. Now the past was clawing at her, and Elliot, this ghost of a boy she'd loved, was offering her a lifeline laced with poison. Before she could answer, a light flared in the distance headlights, bouncing over the uneven road toward the mill. Elliot's head snapped up, his hand grabbing her arm. Someone's coming. Decide, Clara, now. The engine growled closer, gravel spitting under tires. Her pulse thundered as she stared at the envelope in her hands, then at Elliot's desperate, unreadable face. The beam swept over them, blinding, and a voice shouted from the dark a voice she knew too well. Clara, what the hell are you doing out here? The headlights pinned Clara and Elliot in their harsh glow, the air crackling with tension as the voice cut through the night again. Clara, answer me. It was Theo, her brother, his tone sharp with a mix of worry and suspicion. The old pickup truck rumbled to a stop, its engine ticking like a heartbeat as he swung the door open and stepped out. His silhouette was broad against the light, flannel shirt rumpled, a wrench still tucked in his belt from the garage. His dark eyes flicked from Clara to Elliot, narrowing as recognition dawned. Voss. Theo's voice dropped, low and dangerous. You've got some nerve showing your face here. Clara's throat tightened. She shoved the envelope into her coat pocket, the paper crinkling against her ribs as she straightened. Theo, it's not what it looks like. Then what is it? He stalked closer, boots crunching on the gravel, his gaze boring into Elliot. Last I checked, this bastard ran off and left you crying for months. Now he's back, and you're sneaking around the mill like some damn thief. Elliot raised his hands, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Good to see you too, Theo. Still playing the protective big brother? Shut it, Theo snapped, stepping between them. He turned to Clara, his jaw tight. What's he got on you, huh? Why are you out here? Her mind scrambled for a lie, but the truth clawed at her 15 years of silence, the weight of that night by the river pressing down. She could still feel the sticky heat of that summer, hear the splash, see the panic in Elliot's eyes, as they'd sworn to never speak of it. Theo didn't know. He couldn't. But the way he was looking at her now, like he could smell the guilt, made her wonder how blind he'd really been. I needed to talk to him, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. He showed up at the diner, said he was in trouble. Theo's brow furrowed, skepticism etched into every line of his face. Trouble? What kind? Money, Elliot cut in, leaning against a rusted beam of the mill, casual as if they weren't standing on a powder keg. Lost my job down in the city. Came back to see if Hollow Creek had anything left for me. It was a lies move, practiced, and Clara hated how easily it rolled off his tongue. She shot him a glance, but his expression was unreadable, those gray eyes glinting in the truck's headlights. Theo didn't buy it either. She could tell by the way his fists clenched. You expect me to believe that? Theo said. You vanished for half our lives, and now you're just, what, broke and nostalgic? Believe what you want, Elliot replied, shrugging. Clara was just hearing me out. Right, Clara? She nodded, hating the taste of the lie on her own tongue. Yeah, that's all. Theo stared at her, long and hard, the kind of look that peeled back layers. Then he jerked his head toward the truck. Get in. We're going home. Whatever this is, it's done. Clara hesitated, her hand brushing the envelope in her pocket. $2.3 million. A secret big enough to burn Hollow Creek to the ground. And Elliot, who knew too much, who dragged her back into a past she'd fought to forget. She glanced at him, and he gave her the smallest nod, a promise or a threat. She couldn't tell. I'll be fine, Theo, she said, stepping back. I'll walk. I need the air. Clara. Go, she said, firmer this time. I'll call you later. Theo's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. He shot Elliot one last glare, then climbed into the truck, the engine roaring as he peeled away. The taillights faded into the dark, leaving Clara and Elliot alone again, the river's murmur filling the silence. "You're a terrible liar," Elliot said, almost amused. "And you're a bastard," she snapped, turning on him. "What was that?" "You didn't tell me Theo would show up." "I didn't know he would." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "But it changes things. He's watching you now. We need to move fast." "Move fast?" She laughed, incredulous. "You think I'm just going to jump into this stealing from the town, running off with you? I don't even know if I can trust you." "You can't," he said bluntly, and the honesty startled her. "You don't have a choice. That letter I sent, it wasn't a bluff. I've got proof, Clara photos, dates, everything from that night. You help me, and it stays buried. You don't." He let the threat hang, heavy as the mist rolling off the cliffs. Her chest tightened, anger and fear twisting together. "You'd ruin me." "Only if you make me." He softened, just a fraction. "Look, I don't want that. I want out same as you. This money, it's our shot. We pull this off and the creek can rot for all I care." She stared at him, the boy she'd once loved, now a stranger, with a knife to her throat. The envelope felt like a brick in her pocket, the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. Before she could answer, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, wood snapping, or something heavier. Her head whipped toward the sound, heart lurching. "Someone's out there," she whispered. Elliot tensed, his hand brushing his coat like he was reaching for something, weapon, maybe. "Stay here." "No way." She grabbed his arm, flashlight beam darting over the pines. "We're in this together now, right?" He smirked, but it was grim. "Guess we are." They moved toward the sound, the mill's shadow stretching behind them. The river growled louder, its banks slick with mud as they crept through the underbrush. Then she saw it, a figure, hunched near the water, face obscured by a hood. In their hands, a glint of metal caught the moonlight. Not a gun, a camera. The shutter clicked, and Clara's blood ran cold. Someone had been watching them, recording them. The figure bolted, vanishing into the trees, but not before dropping something that fluttered to the ground. Elliot lunged for it, snatching it up, as Clara's flashlight beam landed on the scrap of paper. It was a photograph. Grainy, old, unmistakable. Her 17-year-old self standing by the river, blood on her hands. Clara's breath caught, a ragged gasp swallowed by the river's ceaseless roar. The photograph trembled in Elliot's grip, its edges curling from the damp air. But the image was seared into her mind, her younger self, wild-eyed and frozen in a moment she'd spent 15 years running from. The blood on her hands wasn't hers. It never had been. But that didn't change the weight of it, the way it had stained her life ever since. "Who the hell was that?" she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper as she snatched the photo from Elliot. Her flashlight beam jittered across the muddy bank, chasing shadows that refused to hold still. "Someone who knows too much," Elliot muttered, scanning the trees. His hand hovered near his coat again, and this time Clara saw the faint outline of a knife hilt beneath the fabric. He caught her stare and shrugged, unapologetic. "You think I came back to Hollow Creek unprepared?" She didn't answer. Her pulse hammered, the photograph a hot coal in her fist. The figure with the camera was gone, swallowed by the pines, but the click of the shutter echoed in her skull. They'd been seen, her and Elliot, arguing by the mill, the envelope changing hands. Proof of something new to bury alongside the old. "We need to get out of here," she said, shoving the photo into her pocket with the envelope. The weight of both felt like anchors dragging her down. If they've got more pictures, they won't get far. Elliot's voice was steel, his eyes glinting with the resolve that made her stomach twist. He started toward the trees, but she grabbed his sleeve. "Number. We're not chasing them. Not tonight." Her words came fast, sharp. "We don't even know who they are, what they want." He turned, frustration flashing across his face. "You think waiting's gonna fix this? They've got us, Clara. That photo, it's leverage. Same as the bank statement. Someone's playing a game and we're the pieces. Then we play smarter." She shot back, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "We figure out who's behind this before we go running into the dark like idiots." Elliot studied her, a flicker of something specked. maybe crossing his features. Fine, your call, but we're on borrowed time. She nodded, the adrenaline still buzzing in her veins as they retreated from the riverbank. The mill loomed behind them, its broken windows like eyes watching their every step. The night pressed in, thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, and Clara's mind raced. The letter, the money, the photograph, threads of a web she couldn't see, tightening around her. By the time they reached her house, a squat, weathered bungalow on the edge of town, the sky had deepened to an inky bruise. She fumbled with her keys, the lock sticking as always, and Elliot lingered on the porch, his silhouette stark against the faint glow of the street lamp. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the ghosts of diner grease and loneliness. She flicked on the kitchen light, its buzz filling the silence, as she dropped the envelope and photo onto the table. Elliot followed, closing the door with a soft click. "You got coffee?" "It's midnight," she said, but she was already moving to the pot, needing something to steady her hands. The routine grounded her fill the kettle, scoop the grounds, wait for the hiss of boiling water. Elliot leaned against the counter, watching her with that quiet intensity she'd once mistaken for love. "Tell me about the money," she said finally, keeping her back to him as the coffee brewed. "How'd you find it?" "Luck," he replied too casual. "Was crashing at the old Voss Place Me uncle's cabin up the ridge. Found a box of papers in the attic, tax records, receipts, all pointing to the Hollow Creek Trust. Someone's been funneling cash for decades, road repairs that never happened, grants that disappeared. Mayor's name's all over it." She turned, leaning against the sink. "And you think we can just take it? With the right moves, yeah." He tapped the envelope on the table. "Accounts offshore, untraceable if we're careful. We drain it, split it, disappear." Disappear. The word tasted bitter. She'd dreamed of leaving Hollow Creek 1,000 times, new cities, new skies, but not like this, not with blood money and blackmail. And the photo? What's that got to do with it? Elliot's jaw tightened. That's the wild card. Whoever dropped it wants something money, silence, maybe both. Could be tied to the trust. Could be personal. Personal. The word hung between them, heavy with the past. She poured the coffee, the steam curling up like a question mark, and slid a mug across to him. "That night," she said, voice low, "you never told me why you left." "Not really." He took the mug, his fingers brushing hers for a split second. "Didn't have a choice. After what happened after we..." He stopped, eyes flicking to the photo on the table. "I couldn't stay. You know that." She didn't. Not fully. She remembered the fight by the river, the stranger who'd stumbled into their lives a drifter, drunk and belligerent, swinging a bottle at Elliot. She remembered the push, the fall, the sickening crack of his head on the rocks. They'd panicked, dragged him into the current, watched the water take him. A mistake, a secret, but Elliot had run, and she'd stayed, carrying it alone. Before she could press him, a sharp knock rattled the door. They froze, coffee sloshing in her mug. Another knock, harder, insistent. She set the mug down, heart climbing into her throat, and moved to the window. Peering through the blinds, she saw a figure on the porch stall, familiar. Her best friend Marin's wild curls unmistakable even in the dim light. "Clara?" Marin's voice was tight, urgent. "Open the damn door." Clara hesitated, glancing at Elliot. He nodded toward the table, and she swept the envelope and photo into a drawer before unlocking the door. Marin burst in, her coat damp with mist, her hazel eyes wide with something like fear. "You okay?" Clara asked, shutting the door behind her. "No," Marin said, breathless. "I just came from the diner. Someone broke and trashed the place. And there was this note pinned to the counter." She pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket, thrusting it at Clara. The handwriting matched the first letter. "Tell her to meet me at the cliffs tomorrow, alone, or the next photo goes public." Clara's blood turned to ice. She looked at Elliot, his face a mask of grim certainty. Then back at Marin, who didn't know half the story but was staring at her like she could see right through. "Who's doing this?" Marin demanded. And why's he here? The kitchen clock ticked, each second a hammer strike. Clara's grip tightened on the note, the cliffs looming in her Minda sheer drop where the river met the sky. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching. They were closing in. The kitchen felt smaller, with Marin's question hanging in the air. The walls pressing in as Clara clutched the note. The cliffs, a place she hadn't been since that summer, since the night that fractured her life. The handwriting stared back at her, jagged and accusing, and she could feel Elliot's presence behind her, a shadow she couldn't shake. Marin's gaze darted between them, sharp and searching, her usual warmth replaced by something harder. "Clara," Marin said, stepping closer, her voice low but insistent. "What's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing. The diner's Amestables flipped. The register pried open and now this?" She jabbed a finger at the note. "Who's she? You?" Clara's mouth went dry. She wanted to lie, to weave something simple safe, but Marin wasn't Theo. She wouldn't let it slide. They'd been friends since grade school, stitching each other's wounds with coffee and late-night talks. Marin knew her too well, saw the cracks even when Clara hid them. "It's me," she admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Someone's threatening me." "Threatening you?" Marin's eyes widened, then narrowed as they flicked to Elliot. "And he's part of it?" "No," Clara said quickly, too quickly. "He's helping." Elliot came back because he needed help, Elliot finished, his tone smooth as he stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "Old friend in a tight spot, that's all." Marin didn't buy it. She crossed her arms, her curls bouncing as she tilted her head. "Right. Because you've always been so reliable, Voss. What's the real story?" Clara shot Elliot a warning glance, keep it vague, but his smirk said he'd already decided how to play this. "Someone's got dirt on Clara," he said, leaning against the counter. "Old stuff. They're using it to mess with her. I'm here to even the odds." "Dirt?" Marin's brow furrowed, her gaze snapping back to Clara. "What kind of dirt?" Clara's stomach twisted. She couldn't tell Marin the truth, not about the river, not about the blood. Not yet. "It's complicated," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Something from a long time ago. I don't know who's behind it, but they're serious. The diner, the note, it's all connected." Marin studied her, then sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, fine. You don't want to spill. I get it. But you're not going to those cliffs alone tomorrow. I'm coming with you." "No," Clara said, sharper than she meant. "It says alone, Marin. If they see you." "Then what?" Marin challenged. "They trash my place next? Or worse. I'm not letting you walk into some psycho's trap without backup." "She's right," Elliot said, surprising Clara. He straightened, his casual air gone. "Whoever this is, they're escalating. The photo by the river, now the diner, they're not bluffing. You go alone, you might not come back." Clara's chest tightened. She hated this, hated being cornered. Hated the way her life was unraveling, thread by thread. "And if I don't go, they release whatever they've got. I can't risk that." "Then we don't give them the chance," Elliot said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "We get ahead of them, hit the cliffs early, scope it out, set our own trap." Marin raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Yeah," he said, meeting her stare. "You're in this now, whether you like it or not." Clara wanted to argue, to shove them both out and lock the door, but the note in her hand was a ticking clock. She nodded, reluctant. "Fine. We go at dawn, before they expect me." Marin hesitated, then agreed. "Dawn it is. But you owe me answers, Clara. After this, no more secrets." The promise hung heavy as they parted, Marin heading home to grab a few hours' sleep, Elliot crashing on Clara's lumpy couch. Alone in her room, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the envelope and photo spread before her. The bank statement's numbers glowed in the lamplight. $2.3 million. A fortune built on Hollow Creek's lies. The photo beside it was a darker currency, one she couldn't outrun. She traced the blood on her 17-year-old hands, the memories surging back, the drifter's slurred threats. Elliot's shove, the way the river had swallowed him whole. They told themselves it was an accident. Maybe it was, but the guilt had never cared about maybes. Sleep didn't come. By 5 a.m., the sky was a bruise of purple and gray, and Clara met Elliot and Marin in the kitchen. They drove in silence, Theo's old truck rattling up the winding road to the cliffs. The air grew colder as they climbed, the river a silver thread far below. At the top, the cliff stretched wide, a jagged ledge, framed by gnarled pines, the drop sheer and dizzying. They spread out, moving quietly. Clara's flashlight swept the ground, searching for signs, footprints, anything. Elliot checked the tree line, his knife now openly in hand. Marin stayed close, her breath puffing in the chill. "Here," Elliot called softly, crouching near a cluster of rocks. Clara joined him, her beam landing on a small pile of cigarette butts, fresh, and a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn. "Someone's been waiting for me," Clara murmured, dread pooling in her gut. Before she could say more, Marin's sharp gasp cut through the quiet. "Clara, over here." They hurried to her, the flashlight beam swinging wild. Marin stood near the cliff's edge, pointing at something lodged in the dirt. Clara knelt, her heart sinking as she brushed the soil away. It was a phone chip, scratched, its screen cracked but glowing faintly when she pressed the power button. A single photo loaded. Her and Elliot at the mill, the envelope passing between them, time-stamped last night. "They were there," she whispered, the realization a cold blade against her spine. "They've been watching us the whole time." Elliot swore under his breath, but before he could speak, the ground vibrated a low rumble, growing louder. Headlights pierced the dawn, a black SUV tearing up the road toward them. It screeched to a stop, dust billowing, and two figures stepped out, hooded, shadowed, one holding a camera, the other something bulkier, glinting in the half-light. "Clara Henshaw," a voice called, distorted and mechanical, like it was filtered through a device. "You should have come alone." The second figure raised their arm, and Clara saw a crossbow, bolt loaded, aimed straight at her chest. Clara shot Elliot a warning glance, keep it vague, but his smirk said he'd already decided how to play this. "Someone's got dirt on Clara," he said, leaning against the counter. "Old stuff. They're using it to mess with her. I'm here to even the odds." "Dirt?" Marin's brow furrowed, her gaze snapping back to Clara. "What kind of dirt?" Clara's stomach twisted. She couldn't tell Marin the truth, not about the river, not about the blood. Not yet. "It's complicated," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Something from a long time ago. I don't know who's behind it, but they're serious. The diner, the note, it's all connected." Marin studied her, then sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, fine. You don't want to spill. I get it. But you're not going to those cliffs alone tomorrow. I'm coming with you." "No," Clara said, sharper than she meant. "It says alone, Marin. If they see you..." "Then what?" Marin challenged. "They trash my place next? Or worse. I'm not letting you walk into some psycho's trap without backup." "She's right," Elliot said, surprising Clara. He straightened, his casual air gone. "Whoever this is, they're escalating. The photo by the river, now the diner, they're not bluffing. You go alone, you might not come back." Clara's chest tightened. She hated being cornered, hated the way her life was unraveling thread by thread. "And if I don't go, they release whatever they've got. I can't risk that." "Then we don't give them the chance," Elliot said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "We get ahead of them. Hit the cliffs early, scope it out, set our own trap." Marin raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Yeah," he said, meeting her stare. "You're in this now, whether you like it or not." Clara wanted to argue, to shove them both out and lock the door. But the note in her hand was a ticking clock. She nodded, reluctant. "Fine. We go at dawn, before they expect me." Marin hesitated, then agreed. "Dawn it is. But you owe me answers, Clara. After this, no more secrets." The promise hung heavy as they parted, Marin heading home to grab a few hours' sleep, Elliot crashing on Clara's lumpy couch. Alone in her room, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the envelope and photo spread before her. The bank statement's numbers glowed in the lamplight. $2.3 million. A fortune built on Hollow Creek's lies. The photo beside it was a darker currency, one she couldn't outrun. She traced the blood on her 17-year-old hands, the memory surging back to Drifter's slurred threats. Elliot's shove, the way the river had swallowed him whole. They'd told themselves it was an accident. Maybe it was. But the guilt had never cared about maybes. Sleep didn't come. By 5 a.m., the sky was a bruise of purple and gray, and Clara met Elliot and Marin in the kitchen. They drove in silence, Theo's old truck rattling up the winding road to the cliffs. The air grew colder as they climbed, the river a silver thread far below. At the top, the cliffs stretched, wide-a jagged ledge framed by gnarled pines, the drop sheer and dizzying. They spread out, moving quietly. Clara's flashlight swept the ground, searching for signs, footprints, anything. Elliot checked the tree line, his knife now openly in hand. Marin stayed close, her breath puffing in the chill. "Here," Elliot called softly, crouching near a cluster of rocks. Clara joined him, her beam landing on a small pile of cigarette butts, fresh, and a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn. "Someone's been waiting for me," Clara murmured, dread pooling in her gut. Before she could say more, Marin's sharp gasp cut through the quiet. "Clara, over here." They hurried to her, the flashlight beam swinging wild. Marin stood near the cliff's edge, pointing at something lodged in the dirt. Clara knelt, her heart sinking as she brushed the soil away. It was a phone chip, scratched. Its screen cracked but glowing faintly when she pressed the power button. A single photo loaded, her and Elliot at the mill, the envelope passing between them, time-stamped last night. "They were there," she whispered, the realization a cold blade against her spine. "They've been watching us the whole time." Elliot swore under his breath, but before he could speak, the ground vibrated a low rumble, growing louder. Headlights pierced the dawn, a black SUV tearing up the road toward them. It screeched to a stop, dust billowing, and two figures stepped out hooded, shadowed, one holding a camera, the other something bulkier, glinting in the half-light. "Clara Henshaw," a voice called, distorted and mechanical, like it was filtered through a device. "You should have come alone." The second figure raised their arm, and Clara saw it, a crossbow, bolt loaded, aimed straight at her chest. The crossbow's bolt gleamed in the dawn light, its tip a silent promise of ruin. Clara's breath stopped, the cliff's edge biting into her heels as the hooded figure held her in its sights. Beside her, Elliot tensed, knife in hand, while Marin's gasp hung frozen in the air. The second figure, the one with the camera, stepped forward, their distorted voice slicing through the tension. "Drop the phone, Clara," they said, the mechanical rasp chilling her bones. "And the envelope. You don't get to walk away with that." Her fingers tightened on the cracked phone, the photo of her and Elliot at the mill staring back from the screen. The envelope burned in her pocket. $2.3 million. A town's betrayal, her ticket out. She glanced at Elliot, his jaw set, then at Marin, whose wide eyes begged her to do something. Anything. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you want?" The camera figure tilted their head, almost amused. "Justice. You buried a man, Clara. You and Voss thought the river would keep your secret. It didn't." Her stomach lurched. The Drifter. 15 years ago. They'd never even known his name, just a shadow who'd crossed their path and paid for it. But someone had. Someone who'd waited, watched, planned. The crossbow figure shifted, impatient. "Enough talk. Hand it over, or this ends now." Elliot moved a blur of motion, lunging toward the crossbow, but Clara grabbed his arm, yanking him back. "No," she hissed. "No more blood." He glared at her, but she ignored him, stepping forward, hands raised. "You want the truth? Fine. I'll give it to you, but not like this." She pulled the envelope from her pocket, holding it up. "This is what you're really after, isn't it? The money?" The camera figure hesitated, then nodded. "Smart girl. Toss it here." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't fight them, not with a crossbow aimed at her heart. But she could think. She could play smarter, like she told Elliot. Okay, she said, voice calm. But you're not the only ones watching. She flicked her eyes toward the trees, a bluff born of desperation. Theo's out there. My brother. He followed us. You shoot me, he'll see it all. The figures froze, heads turning to scan the pines. Marin caught on, her voice trembling but firm. Yeah, he's got a phone too, recording everything. A lie, but it bought them a heartbeat. The crossbow wavered, and Clara seized the moment, hurling the envelopinot at the figures. But over the cliff's edge, it fluttered, caught the wind, and vanished into the river below. The camera figure swore, lurching forward, but the crossbow snapped up again, pinning Clara in place. You think that saves you? The distorted voice snarled. We've got the photos, the proof. You're done. Then use it, Clara said, stepping closer, her voice rising with a fire she hadn't known she had. Show the world. I'll tell them myself what happened, why it happened. I was 17, scared, and I made a mistake. But I'm not running anymore. You want justice? Take it. But you don't have to hide behind hoods and threats. The figures exchanged a glance, the air thick with uncertainty. Then the camera figure lowered their device, reaching up to pull back their hood. Clara's breath caught Marin, gasped beside Hera's. The face revealed itself. Lydia Voss, Elliot's aunt. Her gray hair was pulled tight, her eyes cold with a grief Clara hadn't seen coming. Lydia? Elliot's voice cracked, disbelief raw. You? You killed my brother, Lydia said, her natural voice cutting deeper than the distortion ever had. That drifter, his name was Paul. He was a mess, but he was mine. I spent years tracking him down, only to find out you two let him drown. Clara's knees weakened. Paul, a name for the ghost she'd carried. I didn't know, she whispered. We didn't mean. Doesn't matter, Lydia snapped. You covered it up, lived your lives. I didn't get that luxury. She nodded to the crossbow figure still hooded, silent. When Elliot came back, sniffing around the trust, I saw my chance. The money was a bonus. The real prize was you. Elliot stepped forward, knife gone, hands open. Lydia, I'm sorry. I ran because I couldn't face it. But Claire Shea didn't deserve this. Lydia's lip curled, but something flickered in her eyes doubt. Maybe. The crossbow figure lowered their weapon, just an inch, and Clara saw her opening. Then let's end it, she said, voice steady. No more secrets. I'll go to the sheriff tomorrow. Tell him everything. Paul, the river, all of it. You've got your photos. Use them if you want. But the money's gone. The game's over. Lydia stared at her, the wind whipping between them, the river a distant roar. Then she left head a bitter, broken sound. You think confessing fixes this? It won't bring him back. No, Clara said softly, but it'll free us all. The crossbow figure finally spoke, their voice muffled but male. She's right, Lydia. It's enough. They pulled back their hood, Mayor Grayson, his lined face pale in the dawn. The trust's exposed. We're done either way. Lydia's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. She turned away, staring at the cliff's edge, where the envelope had fallen. Go, she muttered, before I change my mind. Clara didn't wait. She grabbed Marin's arm, then Elliot's, pulling them toward the truck. The SUV's engine growled as Lydia and Grayson climbed in, tires spinning as they tore away. Silence settled, heavy and fragile. The cliffs standing witness. Back in Hollow Creek, the day unfolded in a blur. Clara kept her promise, walked into the sheriff's office, told the story of Paul, the river, the panic. The photos never surfaced. Maybe Lydia burned them, or maybe she just let go. The trust's collapse rocked the town. Grayson resigned. Investigation sparked, but Clara felt lighter. The weight of 15 years lifting with every word. Elliot stayed long enough to see it through, then left again, a quiet goodbye on her porch. You're braver than I ever was, he said, and she believed him. Marin stuck by her, brewing coffee as the diner reopened, its scars a badge of survival. "No more secrets?" she asked one night, a teasing edge to her smile. "No more," Clara promised, and meant it. The river kept flowing, its murmur a reminder of what was low stand, what was found. Hollow Creek would never be the same, but neither would she. And for the first time in years, that felt like hope.